the commander of silence. It was past midnight when Aisha Kamara stopped her old car on the lonely Lagos road. Rain poured, thunder rolled, and in the flashing headlights, a child lay bleeding. She rushed to help, but before she could speak, two policemen emerged from the shadows. Their torches blinded her. Their voices turned cruel. "Who are you helping at this hour?" one barked. Her answer didn't matter. They dragged her out, slapped her, and called her names. By dawn, the story had reached her husband, Major David Kamara, the man they should never have touched. The rain had not stopped for hours, turning the Lagos streets into small rivers that carried away the city's secrets. The glow of broken streetlights flickered on the wet asphalt as Aisha Kamara drove home from the hospital, her nurse's uniform still stained with traces of antiseptic and exhaustion. She had just finished a 14-hour shift at Mercy General, the kind of night where life and death wrestled endlessly, and Mercy always seemed too small to win. Her husband, Major David Kamara, was due home the next day from a peacekeeping mission in the Congo. For months, Aisha had carried the household alone, caring for their two children, fixing the leaky roof, and praying at dawn for David's safe return. Tonight, she allowed herself a small smile. Tomorrow, the house will finally feel whole again. But fate has a strange way of twisting joy into tests of faith. As she turned off the highway onto the deserted Oke-Afa road, her headlights caught a small figure lying motionless on the roadside. Her heart leapt. "Oh God," she whispered, braking hard. She stepped into the storm, rain soaking her uniform in seconds. It was a boy, no more than 10, bleeding from his arm, breathing faintly. Aisha dropped to her knees, instincts taking over. "Easy, my child." "Just hold on," she murmured, tearing her scarf to bandage the wound. The boy flinched but didn't speak. She glanced around for help, but the street was empty, except for the faint sound of an engine approaching. Relief washed over her. Someone was coming. Headlights flared. A police truck pulled up, its wipers beating rhythmically against the rain. Two officers stepped out, one tall and hard-faced, the other younger, nervous, still adjusting his belt. "Madam, what's going on here?" The tall one barked, flashlight blinding her eyes. "I'm a nurse," Aisha explained quickly. "This boy's hurt. He needs medical help." But the officer wasn't listening. His gaze dropped to her muddy uniform, the scarf pressed against the boy's wound, the open car door behind her. His lips curled. "Ah, so you're one of them, eh? Traffickers pretending to be nurses now?" Aisha froze. "Sir, Before she could finish, he snatched the scarf from her hand and shoved her back. "Quiet, you people always have stories." The younger officer shifted uneasily. "Oga, maybe we should just—" "Shut up, rookie!" "I know this type. Midnight, wet road, strange boy. Smells like ritual business." Aisha's eyes widened in disbelief. "You're making a mistake. This child needs—" The slap came so fast she barely saw it. The sting burned through her cheek as rain mixed with tears. The boy whimpered. The officer kicked at the ground. "Call the patrol base," he ordered his partner. "Tell them we found a suspect." "But sir," the rookie whispered, "she said she's a nurse from Mercy General." "And I'm the Inspector General," the tall one snapped. "Move!" They dragged Aisha to the truck. Her ID card fell into a puddle, trampled under their boots. The boy's faint voice called out, "Auntie," but the officers ignored him. By the time they reached the station, dawn had begun to break, pale and cruel. Aisha sat handcuffed to a rusted bench, wet clothes clinging to her skin. Every minute felt like an hour. The tall officer, whose name tag read Sergeant Okoro, swaggered past her, humming to himself. "See her pretending innocence," he muttered to his colleague. "When her husband comes, he'll pay for her release like the rest of them." Aisha looked up sharply. "You think you can buy every truth with fear?" she asked quietly. Okoro laughed. "In this country, madam, fear is the only truth." He didn't know her husband. He didn't know that at that very moment, a military plane was descending into Murtala Mohammed Air Base, carrying Major David Kamara, commander of the 12th Special Forces Unit, known among his men as the Commander of Silence. David Kamara had faced warlords, insurgents, and mercenaries. He had negotiated peace with rebels who trusted no one, but nothing would prepare him for the call that awaited him as he stepped off the plane. His phone rang. It was his neighbor, frantic. "Major, you must come quickly. Police took your wife last night. Something about a child on the road. They said she's in custody." David's face turned to stone. He didn't speak. didn't blink. He just nodded once, slipped his phone into his pocket and said, "Get my car." By the time he reached the Okayafa station, the city was waking up, unaware that justice itself was about to face its own trial. Inside, Sergeant Okoro was leaning against the desk, boasting to his colleagues. "She'll learn humility, these people with big English, acting like saints. Wait till I file my report. Attempted child abduction, resisting arrest." A voice cut through the station, calm and deadly. "Sergeant Okoro." The laughter stopped. Heads turned. In the doorway stood a tall man in full military uniform, medals glinting against the morning light. His eyes were cold, his presence filling the room like a storm. Aisha lifted her head, disbelief and relief colliding in her eyes. "David," she whispered. Major Kamara didn't look at her yet. His gaze locked on Okoro. "I am Major David Kamara of the Nigerian Army," he said, voice low but sharp as steel. "You arrested my wife last night. Without a warrant. Without reason. You terrorized a nurse who was saving a child." Okoro's smirk faltered. "Oh, officer, we were only following procedure." David stepped closer, every inch of him radiating controlled fury. "Then let's follow it properly, Sergeant. Starting with your badge number." Outside, thunder rolled again, and for the first time, fear changed sides. The city of Dumari never truly slept. Its streets hummed with the restless pulse of ambition, the impatient horns of Danfoss, the distant call of muezzin, the chatter of traders who measured time not by clocks, but by survival. Yet that morning the city seemed to move slower. The rain that had poured through the night had washed the dust but left behind a strange heaviness, like the air itself carried a secret. At the edge of town, the narrow road that led to River Arrow Bridge was still cordoned off. The police tape fluttered weakly in the wind, half torn, half forgotten. A broken car stood by the roadside, its door ajar, its windshield cracked. Aisha's scarf, blue with tiny white stars, was still caught on the side mirror, swaying like a whisper of pain. Inside Dumari General Hospital, Aisha Kamara lay unconscious. Her face was swollen, her arm in a sling, and a deep bruise shadowed her cheek. The nurses moved gently around her, whispering prayers in English and Hausa. By her bedside sat Mama Kande, an elderly woman from the neighborhood. She had been the one who found Aisha lying in the mud that night, cold, bloodied, and barely breathing. "God sees everything," she kept saying to the nurses. "He will not let this go unpunished." When the door opened, the room seemed to change temperature. Major David Kamara stepped in, his military uniform still damp from the flight, boots dusted with red soil. His presence carried both calm and quiet danger, the kind of silence that comes before thunder. He stood by the door for a long moment, just staring at his wife. His heart felt too heavy for his chest. The woman he had left 3 days ago was full of laughter, teasing him about his serious face, packing food for the soldiers at the base, praying for his safety. Now she looked like a shadow of that woman, bruised, trembling even in sleep. The nurse greeted him softly. "Major Kamara," she regained consciousness briefly at dawn. "But she's weak, sir." "Did she say what happened?" His voice was calm, too calm. The nurse hesitated. "She tried to, but she broke down. The police said it was an accident, that she resisted them at a checkpoint." David's jaw tightened. "Resisted?" The word echoed in the room like an insult. He looked at his wife again, at her swollen face, the marks on her wrists, the kind of marks made by cuffs too tight for mercy. He didn't speak further. He simply pulled a chair closer, took her hand, and sat in silence. When Aisha stirred, her voice came out in broken whispers. "David, they thought—" "I was helping. A thief." He leaned closer, his hand firm over hers. "Shh, rest. Tell me slowly." Tears slipped from her eyes. "A boy, maybe 8, 9. He was lying on the road, bleeding. I stopped to help. Then 2 officers came. They didn't ask, they just shouted. One hit me, the other searched my bag. They said I was hiding something. I begged them to stop. They called me names. I told them I'm a nurse. They didn't care." Her voice cracked. "They took my phone. They laughed when I tried to call for help. One of them, he stepped on my hand." David's fingers tightened around hers. "Do you remember their names?" Aisha shook her head faintly. One had a scar across his cheek. The other was younger, nervous. The older one. He enjoyed it. He nodded once. "That's enough for now." Her breathing grew heavy again, and she drifted back to sleep. David sat there unmoving. Inside, a quiet storm began to rise. He had seen brutality before, in war zones, in failed states where power was unchecked, but never this close, never in the face of the woman he loved. When Mama Conde spoke softly behind him, it was as if she had read his thoughts. "Major, when I found her, the police van was still near. They left her there like she was nothing. I saw one of their badges. I remember the number. L476. David turned slowly. You're sure? She nodded. As sure as the God I serve. He stood. Thank you, Mama. You've done enough. Please watch her until I return. She frowned, sensing the heat in his voice. Where are you going, my son? He met her eyes. To ask questions. By mid-morning, the rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet dust and diesel. David drove through Dumari in his unmarked Jeep, his military ID tucked away. He didn't need uniform authority for this. He needed quiet observation. He stopped first at River Arrow Bridge, the scene of the assault. The mud still carried faint traces of tire marks and a few footprints. On a nearby electric pole, a CCTV camera blinked lazily. He took a photo of it with his phone, then noticed a small kiosk nearby. The woman inside, young, sharp-eyed, selling soft drinks, recognized him instantly. "Ah, you're the man from the news," she whispered. "Major Kamara, the one from the Eastern Unit," he nodded politely. "Did you see what happened here last night?" Her expression turned wary. "I don't want trouble." "There won't be trouble," he assured. "I just need the truth." She looked around, then leaned closer. 2 policemen stopped a woman. "I saw it from here. She didn't fight them. She was helping that small boy. But those men, they beat her. One even broke her phone and threw it into the gutter. Then a truck came and they left fast. The boy was gone too." David's chest tightened. "The boy?" She shrugged. "I don't know. Someone picked him up. Maybe he ran." He nodded, slipped a folded note across the counter. "If anyone asks, you never saw me." The woman gave a quick nod. "Be careful, sir. Those officers work for Inspector Gora's unit. People fear them." David turned back toward his car, his mind racing. Gora. The name was familiar, a police commander rumored for brutality but protected by political ties. At the barracks later that afternoon, David sat in his small office staring at his screen. He typed the badge number, 0476, into the regional security database. The system flagged a result. Corporal Daniel Musa, assigned to Dumari Central Police Division, disciplinary record, 2 previous complaints. Both dismissed. David's lips curved slightly, not a smile, but something colder. He picked up the phone. "Sergeant Naji, I need a favor. Quietly. Get me everything on Corporal Musa and his partner. Tonight." That evening, Aisha woke again. The sunset filtered through the window, casting orange light across her bandaged arm. Her daughter, little Imani, sat by her bedside, humming the lullaby Isha used to sing to her. When she saw her mother's eyes open, she smiled weakly. "Mama, Daddy said he'll make it right." Aisha's heart twisted. "He shouldn't." "He's a soldier, not a policeman." Imani looked down. "He said some people don't understand until silence is broken." Aisha's eyes widened slightly. She knew that tone. She had seen it before in war zones when David returned from missions. That same look, calm outside, burning inside. She closed her eyes and whispered, "God, hold his hand." That night, the streets of Dumari glowed under flickering lamps. David parked near the police barracks and watched from a distance. The officers laughed around a small food stand, beer bottles clinking. He spotted him, the man with the scar across his cheek. Corporal Musa. David's pulse slowed, his breathing measured. He watched as Musa joked with another officer, younger, tense, probably his partner. He didn't move in yet. Not tonight, not until he knew how deep the rot went. He opened his notebook and wrote only 2 lines. 476. Scar, brutal, laughs while hurting. Find the boy. He saw everything. As the night grew thicker, a plan began to take shape. Not of vengeance, but of revelation. David knew revenge burned fast, but justice burned deep. He would not storm the station. He would expose them from within, but for now, sitting in his car under the humming streetlight, he whispered softly to himself, "You touched the wrong woman." And as Dumari slept, the storm within Major Kamara finally began to rise. The next morning, Damari woke under a washed-out sky, gray and restless. The night's storm had passed, but its memory clung to the streets. Puddles mirrored the clouds, and the smell of wet earth mixed with exhaust fumes. At Damari General Hospital, Aisha sat by the window, her arm still in a sling, watching the rainwater trickle down the glass like slow tears. The doctor had said she could leave soon, but she wasn't sure she wanted to. Outside, the world had changed, or maybe she had. The city she once healed with her hands now looked like a place that had tried to break her spirit. A nurse entered quietly. "Madam Kamara, there's a visitor." Aisha turned, expecting her husband, but it was a journalist. Young, sharp-eyed, wearing a badge that read Daily Voice Africa. "Mrs. Kamara, I'm sorry to intrude." The journalist began, her tone polite but firm. "I'm investigating a report, an alleged altercation between you and two Damari police officers. The official statement says you resisted arrest during a stop and search." Aisha's chest tightened. "Resisted? I was helping a dying child," the journalist nodded, lowering her voice. "I believe you, but they're spreading a different story, that you attacked an officer. The police press unit released photos of your car. Social media's already talking." Aisha's throat burned. "They're turning me into a criminal." The journalist's gaze softened. "If you're willing, I can help tell your side, truthfully. But it's risky. These men have protection." Aisha looked down at her trembling hands. For years she'd believed silence was the safest prayer. But now silence had almost killed her. She whispered, "When my husband returns, we'll speak." The journalist nodded. "Then I'll wait for your call." Across town, Major David Kamara sat in the back of a dim cafe in Damari's old quarter. His friend, Sergeant Naji, slid a file across the table. "You asked for everything on Corporal Daniel Musa and his partner. Here it is. But brother, be careful. This is deep." David flipped through the file, photocopied reports. Grainy photos, complaint records stamped closed. "Musa," Naji said, leaning close, "works under Inspector Gora, the one with the politicians behind him. Every case against them dies before it reaches court. Their victims? Market women, taxi drivers, poor people. They know who to target." David's eyes narrowed. "And the boy? The one my wife tried to save." Naji hesitated. "That's the strange part. The boy's name is Timi Adeyemi, 8 years old. Street child, no fixed home. He was taken by an ambulance that night, but no hospital reported his arrival." "It's like he vanished." David leaned back, silent. The hum of the cafe faded. "Someone made sure he disappeared." Naji nodded grimly. "Either they bought him off or silenced him." David exhaled slowly. "Find me where that ambulance came from." That evening, Aisha returned home. Their small compound smelled of damp earth and detergent. Imani ran to her, wrapping tiny arms around her waist. "Mama, Daddy said I can't watch TV news. He said they lied." Aisha smiled faintly, touching her daughter's curls. "He's right, my love. Sometimes truth hides behind silence." But when she turned on her phone, the lies were everywhere. Headlines screamed, "Nurse assaults officer, Damari police under scrutiny." Her face was blurred, but her name wasn't. Comments flooded in, some sympathetic, others cruel. She scrolled through them until her vision blurred. Then she heard David's voice behind her. "Don't read those," he said quietly. She turned. "They're saying I attacked him." David sat beside her, his face unreadable. "That's how they protect their own. By rewriting the truth." Aisha's eyes welled. "Then what are we going to do?" He met her gaze. "We'll find the truth, and make them choke on it." For the next few days, Damari seemed to move under an invisible tension. David drove through back streets, visited informants, and spoke to hospital workers off record. Every clue pointed to the same thing: a web of corruption binding the police, ambulance services, and a private security firm owned by a politician named Chief Adewale Olorin. At a rundown cyber cafe, David met a young tech worker named Kachi, who claimed to have access to security camera feeds. "Sir," Kachi whispered, "that camera near River Arrow Bridge, I pulled the footage before they deleted it." David leaned forward. "You have it?" Kachi nodded nervously, glancing at the door. "But you didn't get this from me." He handed over a flash drive. "It shows everything. They stopped your wife. The boy ran. One officer hit her. The other tried to stop him. You can see the badge numbers clearly." David placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. "You've done the right thing." Kachi's eyes darted nervously. Sir, they'll come for me if they find out. David slipped an envelope into his hand. Leave town for a few days. Use this. Stay safe. Back at home, Aisha watched as David plugged the flash drive into his laptop. The video was grainy, but clear enough. She gasped. That's him, the one with the scar. David paused the frame, zooming in. Corporal Daniel Musa. Then another figure came into focus. The younger officer, hesitant, face pale under the streetlight. Aisha whispered, he tried to stop the other one. You can see it, David nodded, which means he knows more than he's saying. He saved the footage, backed it up twice, then looked at his wife. This is the beginning. 2 days later, a black van stopped outside their house. 3 men stepped out, plainclothes officers. They knocked heavily on the gate. David opened it calmly. Major Kamara? One asked, pretending courtesy. We're from Dumari Central. The commissioner requests your presence. Routine questioning about an ongoing investigation. David's eyes didn't blink. You mean the same investigation your men fabricated? The officer's smile faltered. Sir, we can make this easy. David folded his arms. No need. Tell the commissioner I'll visit him, when I decide the time. The men exchanged uneasy looks. The leader muttered, Careful, Major. Even soldiers bleed. David stepped forward just enough for his shadow to cover them. And some men drown in their own lies. They left without another word. Inside, Aisha trembled. They're trying to intimidate us. David locked the door behind them. Which means we're close. Later that night, he went to see Naji again. The boy Timi, David said. I need to find him. He's the key. Naji pulled out a folded report. A nurse from a rural clinic said a child matching his description was dropped there 2 nights ago. Unconscious, badly beaten. He woke yesterday. Says he remembers everything. David's eyes sharpened. Where? Makola Clinic, near the outskirts. Without another word, David was already heading for the door. The clinic sat at the edge of Dumari sprawl. One generator humming, mosquitoes whining in the corners. Inside, the boy Timi sat on a bed, small and frightened, clutching a plastic car toy someone had given him. When David entered, Timi's eyes widened. You're the soldier from the photo? David knelt. You saw what happened that night, didn't you? The boy nodded slowly. The woman tried to help me. I was hit by a bike. Then the police came. The big one, the one with the scar, hit her. The other tried to stop him, but he shouted, said, orders from above. Did they say a name? Timi thought hard. They called him Inspector Gora. David felt the air thicken. You're very brave, Timi. Would you help me show people the truth? Timi hesitated, then whispered, If it will stop them from hurting others. David smiled faintly. That's exactly what it will do. The next day, the Dumari police headquarters buzzed with whispers. Word had spread that someone, a military officer, was digging where no one dared. Inspector Gora, a broad man with cold eyes, sat behind his desk, smoke curling from his cigarette. He slammed his fist down. Who does this Kamara think he is? He's stirring up things that were buried. Corporal Musa, standing stiffly before him, replied, Sir, he's angry about his wife. But I think he has evidence. Gora's eyes narrowed. Then make sure it disappears. And if the soldier keeps pushing, he leaned forward. Remind him Dumari doesn't bow to medals. That evening, David parked outside Dumari Central Station. He had no appointment, no warrant, just a purpose that could not wait. He walked through the gates, his boots echoing on the concrete. Officers turned to stare, some out of respect, others out of unease. When he reached the reception desk, he spoke evenly. Tell Inspector Gora that Major Kamara is here to see him. The clerk hesitated. Sir, he's... Before she could finish, Gora himself appeared from the corridor, cigarette in hand, fake smile plastered across his face. Major Kamara. What an unexpected visit. David's eyes met his, calm but unyielding. I came to discuss an assault on my wife. By your men. Gora exhaled smoke lazily. Unfortunate misunderstanding, I hear. But our internal review found nothing, David cut in softly. Then perhaps you should review this. He pulled out a small flash drive and placed it on the table between them. Gora stared at it, then at David. You think you can threaten me? I don't threaten, David said quietly. I remind men that silence has limits. For a long moment they locked eyes, soldier and cop, truth and corruption. Around them, the station's hum seemed to fade. Finally, Gora's smile cracked. Be careful, Major. Justice can be dangerous. David turned to leave. Only for those who fear it. That night, Dumari's air felt electric. Rain gathered again on the horizon, rumbling softly. Aisha sat with Imani asleep beside her, praying under her breath. David returned home past midnight, his uniform damp, his face unreadable. Did you see him? Aisha asked quietly. I did. And? David looked out the window, watching lightning flicker over the distant skyline. He knows I have proof. But he's not scared, not yet. Fear will come when the truth no longer hides in my hand, but in every voice in Dumari. Aisha reached for his hand. And until then? He glanced at her, eyes steady. Until then we wait, and we prepare. Outside, the thunder rolled, soft, deliberate, like a drumbeat announcing the storm to come. Morning crept into Dumari like a cautious visitor, unsure whether it was welcome. The city was quieter these days, as though holding its breath. Aisha's name had become a whisper, spoken in markets, in taxis, in school corridors, sometimes in pity, sometimes in admiration. The story of her assault had spread beyond her control, twisted by the police and reshaped by the streets. Yet amid the noise, something unexpected was happening. People were beginning to believe her. In the crowded ward of St. Mary's Clinic, Aisha sat by the window, sunlight spilling across her bandaged hands. It had been weeks since that night, the night that broke her body but not her soul. The doctors called it recovery, but she knew better. It was resurrection. Every time she touched her scars, she remembered the darkness that had almost swallowed her. But instead of fear, she now felt something else, clarity. She had seen the face of injustice up close, and it no longer terrified her. David sat quietly beside her bed, his posture still disciplined, but his eyes softer now. He had stopped wearing his military uniform. It drew too much attention. Instead, he wore a plain white shirt, sleeves rolled up, notebook in hand. You don't have to fight this war alone, Aisha said one morning, her voice fragile but determined. He looked up. I don't intend to. Then promise me something. What? Promise me you'll fight it the right way. Not with anger and with truth, David hesitated. In his world, truth and justice rarely won without blood. But in her world, the world of healing, forgiveness, and quiet strength, truth was a weapon of its own. I promise, he finally said. That was the morning the tide began to turn. David's investigation had evolved from curiosity into obsession. His small apartment in downtown Dumari now resembled a war room. Maps of the city pinned with red markers, photographs of corrupt officers, notes scrawled across brown paper. Each thread led back to one man, Inspector Gora, a decorated officer on paper, but in reality, the architect of an invisible network of extortion, intimidation, and fear. Aisha had described his voice, smooth, menacing, full of false authority. David had found that voice again, buried deep within a leaked audio clip he recovered from a police informant. The file was short, just 18 seconds, but it was enough to ignite a storm, make sure it looks like an accident. No witnesses, no noise. You know what to do. The clip didn't name anyone, but the accent, the phrasing, the authority, it was Gora. David was sure of it. Still, evidence wasn't enough. In Dumari, truth needed courage to breathe. So he turned to the few people he could trust, a journalist, a priest, and a lawyer. Nuru Adewale, journalist and social media activist, had once been silenced by police threats. When David showed him the recording, his eyes widened. Commander, this isn't just a story, he said. It's a revolution waiting to be told. Father Malou, an old chaplain who had prayed with soldiers before they marched into war, became the group's moral center. Truth must rise like the morning sun, he said, blessing their cause, even if darkness tries to swallow it. And then there was Kemi Ladoja, a young human rights lawyer with a sharp mind and a fire in her words. Justice in Dumari doesn't walk, she told David, flipping through the case file. It crawls. But with this, we might just make it run. Together they formed what the city would later call the Circle of Courage, though at the time, it was just 4 determined souls meeting in a dimly lit church basement. While David hunted for proof, Aisha found her own form of resistance. She began visiting schools and clinics, speaking softly but powerfully about resilience, faith, and dignity. I was beaten, she told the children of St. Peter's Primary. But I am not broken, and neither are you, no matter who tries to silence you. Her words began to circulate online, small clips shared by friends and strangers. She didn't ask for fame, but Dumari gave it to her anyway. Soon, the same faces that had looked away in the market now nodded respectfully when she passed. Even the city's women traders, long accustomed to injustice, began whispering, "If Aisha can speak, maybe we can too." It wasn't a rebellion yet, but it was awakening. Corruption, however, never sleeps. One night David returned home to find his apartment door slightly ajar. The walls were untouched, but his investigation board was gone. Every note, every photo, every document. They had been watching. Hours later, Nuru's news website went down mysteriously. His car followed. Father Malu received an anonymous call warning him to stay out of police business. David clenched his fists, the soldier in him rising. But he remembered Aisha's voice, not with anger, with truth. He sat by the window that night, Dumari's skyline glowing faintly under the stars, and made a new vow. "They think fear can silence us," he murmured. "They've forgotten. I've seen worse in war." He backed up everything on multiple drives, hid them in separate locations, and began reaching out to international human rights groups through encrypted channels. The battle for Dumari was no longer local. It had gone global. In the markets, people began to talk, softly at first, then louder. "They say a soldier is collecting evidence. They say the nurse is speaking again. They say the police are afraid." Every whisper was a spark. Soon hashtags appeared online. Shared justice for Aisha and for voice of Dumari, spreading faster than the authorities could suppress them. Radio stations began to pick up the story. Even those owned by the state couldn't ignore the rising tide. Dumari's people, long silenced by fear, were remembering their voices. And as for the police, they responded with more raids, more silence, more lies. But this time, the fear didn't work. It was during one of Aisha's public talks that David saw him again, Corporal Musa, the officer who had led the assault that night. He stood at the back of the crowd, in plain clothes, arms crossed, smirking. Aisha froze when she noticed him, her voice faltering. The crowd turned to look. Musa's grin widened. David's instincts roared, his muscles tightened, his vision narrowed. Every soldier in him wanted to strike. But then he caught Aisha's eyes, calm, defiant, full of quiet strength. He walked toward Musa slowly, each step deliberate. The crowd sensed tension and parted silently. "Musa," David said, voice low but steady. "You shouldn't be here." "Public space," Musa sneered. "Or do soldiers own Dumari now? You've done enough damage. Walk away." The two men stood inches apart, tension thick enough to choke the air, but David didn't strike. Instead, he leaned close and whispered, "I have your voice on tape." For the first time, Musa's confidence faltered. His smirk vanished. "You're lying," he said, but his voice trembled. David turned and walked away. No fight, no spectacle, just a soldier reclaiming dignity through discipline. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Some cheered, others simply stared, but everyone knew what they had witnessed, power shifting ever so slightly. That night, Aisha and David sat together by the coast. The waves of Dumari crashed softly against the rocks. Timeless, patient, relentless. "You did well today," she said quietly. "I wanted to hit him," David admitted. "But then I realized, that's what they expect. For us to lose control so they can call us criminals." She smiled faintly. "Then you've already won the first battle." He nodded, gazing at the horizon. The city lights flickered behind them like fading stars. "Something's happening, Aisha," he said. "People are no longer afraid." "Then justice is near," she whispered. And for the first time in months, the air of Dumari carried not just the smell of dust and fear, but hope. Morning in Dumari came with a strange silence, the kind that only follows a storm. Clouds hung low over the city, heavy and bruised. Beneath them, whispers moved faster than traffic, Something was about to break. In a quiet room lit by a single bulb, David Kamara sat before his laptop. His hands trembled not from fear, but from the weight of decision. The file was ready, time-stamped, verified, encrypted. The footage showed everything. The assault, the lies, the cruelty that turned his wife from healer to headline. He thought of Aisha's voice the night before, soft but resolute. If truth dies in silence, David, then what was all our pain for? He pressed upload. A green bar crawled across the screen. The air felt heavier with each second. Outside, Dumari was waking up, but this morning would not be ordinary. Within minutes, the footage spread like wildfire. It hit local news channels, then global feeds. Hashtags flooded social media. Justice for Aisha. End Dumari abuse. News anchors stuttered. Politicians called emergency meetings. The same officers who mocked Aisha's cries were suddenly ghosts. Phones switched off, families vanished from their homes. Across town, Aisha Kamara stood on her balcony, watching the first rays of sunlight pierce the gray. Her heart raced as she scrolled through the headlines, her face, her name, her pain, everywhere. For the first time, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel like the woman who was left bleeding in the rain. Tears slid down her cheeks, not of sorrow, but release. They will finally see, she whispered. They will finally see. Down in the streets, people gathered, market women, students, drivers, even policemen's wives. They held placards, sang freedom songs, and shouted Aisha's name. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about them all. Meanwhile, in the grim corridors of Dumari Central Police Station, Inspector Gora paced like a trapped lion. Sweat darkened his collar despite the air conditioning. Every few seconds he checked his phone, only to curse at the endless flood of messages. "Sir, the video's everywhere," a young officer muttered. "I can see that fool," Gora snapped, slamming his fist on the desk. He turned to Corporal Musa, whose face was pale. "You told me you deleted everything, every single things." "I did, sir. I swear. Then how is the whole damn city watching it on their phones?" Musa had no answer. Fear had already hollowed him out. At City Hall, the mayor and police commissioner held an emergency press conference. Cameras clicked. Faces looked drained of sleep and spin. "We condemn the incident and assure the citizens of Dumari that a full investigation is underway." The commissioner read stiffly. But the people weren't listening. They were already in the streets. From the roof of his building, David watched the crowd swell like a living tide. His friend Nuru, the journalist, stood beside him, phone in hand. "You know what you just did, my brother," Nuru said quietly. "You started something that can't be stopped." David's eyes were fixed on the distance, on the crowd chanting Aisha's name. "I didn't start it," he said. "They did. The night they touched her." By afternoon, Dumari was on fire. Not with violence, but with unity. Churches rang bells, mosques echoed prayers for justice. Artists painted murals of Aisha on cracked walls. Vendors handed out food to protesters. For the first time, rich and poor stood side by side. But inside the Ministry of Security, fear turned into fury. Files were shredded, phones destroyed. The minister barked orders. "Find this man, Major Kamara. If he wants war, we'll give him one." That evening, as the city chanted for truth, Aisha walked into the very hospital she once worked in. The halls fell silent. Nurses and patients stood, stunned, as she passed. Some clapped, some wept. She met Dr. Miriam Ose, the woman who had stood by her through the trial of silence. "You did this, Aisha," Miriam said softly. Aisha shook her head. "No, we did. Every woman who was told to shut up, every man who watched in fear, they did this." Outside, the roar of the people reached the windows. Dumari was breathing again. But far away, in a dimly lit office, a call was made. "Gora," said a low voice on the other end. "You've become a liability." Silence, then a click. Minutes later, a car sped out of the station gates, headlights off, fading into the dark highway. David stood on his balcony, watching lightning crackle in the distance. He knew this wasn't the end. Truth had a price. Still, For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to close his eyes and breathe. Tomorrow, he whispered. The storm will break. Night crept over Dumari with restless energy. Helicopters hovered above the city, searchlights slicing through the humid air. Protests had turned into vigils, streets glowing with candles instead of flames. The people had found their voice, and it echoed through every alley. Justice for Aisha. Justice for all. In the Kamara home, Aisha sat with her mother, Mama Binta, whose wrinkled hands trembled as she clasped her daughters. You were born under the drum of thunder, Mama Binta murmured. Even the sky cannot silence your name now. Aisha smiled weakly. But thunder fades, Mama. Only if the world forgets the storm, her mother said. Meanwhile, in the city's shadows, Inspector Gora's car screeched to a halt at an abandoned warehouse near the docks. He stumbled out, phone pressed to his ear. Minister, listen, if you throw me under the bus, I'll... A gunshot cracked the air. Gora froze. The phone slipped from his hand. Out of the darkness stepped two men in suits, silent, precise. They took the phone, then the keys, and left him standing alone. He understood. He was no longer useful. The system devours its own. For the first time, the mighty Inspector Gora felt fear not of others, but of himself. At the National Broadcasting Office, Nuru and his media team worked non-stop. They aired interviews with victims, whistleblowers, and even anonymous officers willing to speak. Their newsroom smelled of sweat, paper, and revolution. David, they're scared. Nuru said over the phone. Half the parliament wants a full inquiry. The president just ordered an independent tribunal. David didn't answer right away. His gaze was fixed on the city skyline, glowing orange from the torchlight below. Justice, he finally said, isn't just about punishment, it's about remembering. He hung up, walked to Aisha, and knelt beside her. Her face was pale but peaceful. Are you ready? He asked. For what? To step into the light. The next morning, Dumari Square was filled beyond measure. Tens of thousands gathered, silent but fierce. Flags fluttered. Handmade posters carried her name, her face, her courage. On the makeshift stage stood a microphone, trembling slightly in the wind. David took her hand and led her up. The crowd parted like water. Aisha looked out, faces of strangers and friends, rich and poor, united by something larger than pain. She steadied herself, then spoke into the mic. They said I was weak because I cried, but my tears watered the roots of truth. They said I should forget, but I remembered. For every woman who cannot. I forgive them, not because they deserve it, but because my heart deserves peace. The square erupted, not with rage, but with catharsis. Inside Government House, the tribunal commenced. Camera lights flashed as handcuffed officers, including Corporal Musa, were brought in. The judge's gavel struck. By the authority of the people of Dumari, this court finds the defendants guilty of gross abuse of power, obstruction of justice, and assault. Gasps, cheers, tears. The city outside roared. Aisha didn't attend the hearing. She sat quietly in the hospital chapel instead, her hands folded. She didn't need to see vengeance. She had already witnessed awakening. Later that week, David was summoned to the barracks. The chief of defense shook his hand. Major Kamara, your courage has restored the honor of this nation's uniform. We owe you. David simply nodded. I didn't fight for medals, sir. I fought for silence to end. That evening, Dumari exhaled. Shops reopened. Children played again. The city smelled of rain and redemption. Aisha and David drove to the edge of the city, to the same highway where it all began. The asphalt glistened under a light drizzle. They parked near the spot where she had found the boy that night. He lived, David said softly. The doctor said he'll walk again. Aisha smiled. Then the road gave two lives that night, his and mine. They stood side by side, watching the sunset bleed into the horizon, gold melting into crimson. Do you think they'll change? She asked. Maybe not all at once, David replied. But change begins when one voice refuses to stay quiet. She reached for his hand. Then let's never be quiet again. Back in the city, murals of Aisha appeared on walls and bridges, painted by youth who once felt invisible. At schools, teachers told her stories. At police academies, cadets studied her case as a lesson in integrity. The storm that once sought to break her had instead washed the city clean. Late at night, Aisha sat at her desk, writing. The soft hum of the fan filled the room. Her pen moved steadily across the paper. To every woman who has been silenced. To every man who has watched injustice and felt powerless. Remember, light does not ask permission to shine. She placed the paper in an envelope marked for tomorrow. David entered quietly, reading over her shoulder. What's that for? He asked. For the foundation, she said. For those who will speak when I can't. He smiled. Then Dumari's in good hands. They stood by the window, looking out at a city reborn. Far below, church bells chimed, deep and soft, as though the city itself was praying. And somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled again, not in anger, but in remembrance. A reminder that even after the storm, the sky never forgets its power to roar. The morning after the storm felt different. Dumari, a city once drenched in silence and fear, awoke to the sound of voices, not of protest or pain this time, but of prayer, laughter, and something that had long been missing. Hope. From the shattered courthouse steps to the markets that hummed with renewed life, the air was alive with a truth no decree could suppress. The truth had broken through every locked door, every bought uniform, every trembling whisper that once said, nothing will change. Aisha stood by the window of St. Mary's Clinic, where the soft gold of dawn fell across her bandaged arm. Outside, children played, their giggles echoing like small, defiant bells. She smiled faintly, her eyes tracing the skyline, rooftops catching fire with light, the red earth glistening after rain. For the first time in months, she could breathe without fear. And for the first time ever, she could feel proud of her scars. On the other side of the city, David stood at the plaza where the reform banners had been raised. The camera crews were gone, but the people remained, sweeping the square, repainting walls once plastered with lies. He held a worn piece of paper in his hand, the resignation of Deputy Commissioner Cole, the man who once thought himself untouchable. Justice, David murmured under his breath, isn't born in courtrooms. It's born in people. His phone buzzed. A message from Aisha. The children are safe. The city is healing. Come see what we fought for. He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of every soul who had stood with them. The mothers who hid their sons. The journalists who risked their names. The ordinary people who dared to believe that truth was stronger than fear. And high above them all, Dumari, the city of iron and dust, seemed to whisper through the wind that rushed between its towers. I remember their silence. I remember their cries. But today, I remember their courage. At the community square, Aisha met David beneath the acacia tree, the same one where children had once scattered when the sirens came. Now the sirens are gone. The air was full of songs. Do you think it'll last? She asked quietly. David looked around, at the stalls reopening, the murals rising on cracked walls, the policemen walking without guns, just eyes open and heads bowed. Yes, he said softly, because this time it wasn't given. It was earned. Aisha turned to him, her face glowing in the amber light. Then we keep earning it. Every day, he nodded. And as the sun climbed higher, the two of them walked through the crowd. No longer symbols, no longer saviors, just people. Two among thousands, carrying the same flame forward. Somewhere behind them, a child shouted, "That's Auntie Aisha," and waved a small paper sign that read, "Truth lives here." The crowd began to chant, not her name, not his, but the name of their city, Dumari. Dumari, Dumari. Each voice rose higher, weaving into a chorus that seemed to wash the dust from the streets themselves. And if you stood far enough away, high on the hill where the old watchtower leaned, you could swear the wind carried something new, a melody soft as dawn, fierce as memory, pure as forgiveness. Dumari, once broken, was breathing again, and beneath that golden breath of morning, two souls who had once stood against darkness now stood in the light, not as heroes, but as reminders that courage is contagious, that truth, once spoken, never dies, and that even the smallest act of kindness, a nurse staying to help, a man daring to question, can become the spark that saves a city. As the camera of time pulled back, the streets shimmered, voices blending into the rhythm of a heartbeat. steady, alive, reborn, and Dumari spoke once more. In a whisper only hearts could hear, they tried to bury us, but they forgot we were seeds. In every city where silence once reigned, a new voice rises. Yours. If Aisha's courage and David's fight stirred something in your heart, don't let it fade here. Share their story. Let it travel beyond Dumari's streets, into every home that still waits for justice, every heart that still believes in light. Subscribe, like, and share this story, not for us, but for those still unseen, unheard, unbroken. Because every click, every voice, every heart that listens keeps the fire alive. This is not the end. It's the beginning.